Thank you. Hello. Wow. I've been listening and so inspired by the talks. I almost forgot that I was nervous. And then I walked out here and it all came back to me. I'm nervous because I'm not a speaker. I'm a writer. And I probably was motivated to become a writer in part so that I would never, ever have to get up in front of people and, talk. But because of my vocation, I do spend a lot of time, required time, really taking in my surroundings. And so I can say with confidence and certainty that I really do have a deeply ingrained sense of place. Unfortunately, it's not really something I can boast about because I would suspect that most of you, if not all of you, have it too. I want to talk a little bit about where it comes from and where it's going. I really don't see it as something that happens only in real time. I believe it echoes and echoes through our lives again and again. Geography is my wound. It is also my anchor, my port of call. Unfortunately, I am not the novelist who wrote those words. Pat Conroy is. I wish I did, because I think that they really describe the way that geography imprints us. I want you to think back on your own childhood geography. Mine began here on the Puget Sound, overlooking the Olympic Mountains. And before my parents got married, they moved from the Midwest to Seattle. And until then, my mother had never seen a mountain or an ocean or even a body of salt water. And she was in awe. And she used to walk along the rocky shore and look at the tide pools and collect beach glass. And I still have this mason jar of the frosty glass that she collected. And I have this wacky theory that her sense of joy and discovery at that time somehow worked its way through the umbilical cord and knit itself in my own bones and tissue and heart. And whether or not you kind of can go with that theory or not, I think we would all agree that sense of place really kicks in early childhood. Now, I moved away from this area when I was 8 years old, but this landscape holds some of my strongest childhood memories, and I want you to think back to some of your very earliest memories. I remember a birthday party that my mom threw me when I was 4, and instead of playing pin the tail on the donkey, she handed all the kids shovels, and she said, "Okay, we're going to play fill the pail with clams." And we thought it was really cool, and we had enough clams so she could make chowder for our dinner that night, and smart woman, my mom. And I was part of that last generation that was allowed to, or commanded really, to go outside, play, we'll see you at dinner, try to find some more clams. And I really spent a lot of time alone in the woods and on the beach, and sometimes I would take my little sister, and I want you to try to imagine that happening today. A 4-year-old and a 7-year-old playing alone in the woods, no GPS, not even an iPad to design your floor plan of your fort before you build it. So I have moved many times since then. I've lived in 25 houses. But I'm still stirred by mountains and water and trees. And in my early 20s, I drove with my first husband up to Alaska, where he was from. And we arrived at this town called Homer on the Kenai Peninsula. And I looked out over the Kachemak Bay at the Kenai Mountains. And I was struck with an aching familiarity. And I desperately wanted to move there. His first job took us to San Diego. Not quite the wilderness that it's lovely, but it wasn't what I was picturing. And when I was pregnant with our first son, I was dreaming and really yearning for Alaska and imagining what it might be like to move there. And we never did move there. But there might be something to my theory about sense of place beginning in utero, because when our son Daniel was 1.5 years, we took him to the mountains for the very first time. And we took him and we stepped on the trailhead, and he immediately bent down and put his hands in the dirt and just belly laughed. And he kept belly laughing, and we were looking at each other and down at him, and his dad said to me, "Man, we gotta get this kid off the pavement more often." And that kid grew up. And where do you think he headed? Alaska, of course, where he just earned a degree in biology, and he has spent the last 4 summers in the Togiak Forest working for Fish and Wildlife. No phone, no internet, no television. He says he has found his bliss there. And I never moved to Alaska, but fortunately, I am not a one-place woman. And in 2005, I fell in love with another place. And I moved to Sonoma County, where I made really highly acute observations, like, those are extremely happy California cows. And look at the rain. I'd been in Southern California, the rain. Look at the trees, because Alaska has bigger mountains, but we have way bigger trees. And I was so moved by the beauty surrounding me that I ended up setting my novel, The Underside of Joy, in Sonoma County. And originally, I set it in the real town of Occidental. But then I had the unprecedented opportunity to stay at my very generous friend's cabin at Villa Grande on the Russian River. And my husband promised to at least try to keep track of our brood of they were older teenagers. And I took the dog and went to the cabin, and I stayed there an entire month. And the family came out to visit a few times, but mostly I was alone as you can be with a yellow lab. And I stoked the wood stove, and I did not have internet. I did not have a smartphone. I did not have television, and I didn't even get into a car the whole time I was there. I wrote, and I wrote, and I walked, and I walked. And walking in those woods really took me deeper into my novel. But it also took me deeper into my own childhood. I had a real strong memory of the shadows from the trees falling on me, and the patch of sky, the blue patch way up above, and the way the light filtered down, and I could hear the woodpeckers and smell the wood smoke, and I could taste the blackberries, and I was, just no distractions whatsoever, really experiencing a place fully as I had as a child. And the experience changed me, and it really changed the book. And I ended up taking Occidental and mushing it up and morphing it with Villa Grande, and it became the fictional town of Elbow on the Russian River. Now, I call it the Redwoods River in the book. This is the Villa Grande post office right here that has been transformed through my imagination and a little help from Photoshop into the Elbow. Now, I get email from readers that say, I really want to live in Elbow. And I have to tell them, that's going to be a little tricky. But I think it illustrates how even a fictional place can have a really strong pull on us. Now, at one point in my novel, my characters are standing in a vineyard, and they're discussing terroir. I can never say that word right. Some of you may be familiar with the term. It's a debated term in the wine industry, and some people say, oh, it is the expression of the land from which the grapes came. And others say, no, it's viticulture. It's how the grapes themselves are treated. And then there's still others who say, no, it's the whole shebang. It's the geology of the land and all the way until when the wine is corked. And my main character, Ella, says, she talks about how her kids have this sense of place themselves, that elbow has permeated them and they have their own terroir. And I believe in the terroir of people, too. And even though at the beginning I said we all have a sense of place, I think that it's also at risk of becoming a dying art, or a dying awareness, if you will, because we are more screened in than we've ever been with all of our different screens in front of us, the screens that divide us from experiencing a place fully. And I'm not saying we give up technology as if we could, but my son has an idea that if we were to evolve as a species based on how we're living right now, that eventually we may look something like this. Because we don't need noses or taste buds or nerve endings if we can't touch and taste and smell the internet. So I just think that we need to be aware of maybe taking designated breaks or somehow to preserve these echoes that go through our lives. And I want to close with a story about a friend of mine, Joan, told me this about a woman she knows named Irma. And Irma is 100 years old. And she was telling Joan that when she was a little girl, she lived in Long Island and she was body surfing off the coast there. And even though this happened over 90 years ago, Irma was telling it with such sensory detail that it was almost to Joan as if it had just happened. She was describing the taste of the salt water and her nose getting full of water and being slammed and twisted by the wave. And it turned out that Joan, too, was from New York, and she had been to the exact same beach. And pretty soon they were talking about picking strawberries and how, they never got, the bucket stayed empty, but the juice of the strawberries was on their chins and down their shirts. And they were laughing, and then Irma took Joan's hand and she gripped it really tightly. She looked in her eyes and she said, "Oh, honey, don't you wish we could go back and do it all again?" Thank you.